Hey guys, how are you today? Quick rant before we dive into today's chaos. As some of you might have noticed, YouTube's algorithm has decided I'm not special anymore. Shocking, I know. So now if you don't like, comment, or do a little backflip in the algorithm's honor, this video might just vanish into the void, never to be seen again. Seriously though, even a hi or "this is wild" in the comments helps way more than you think. It tells YouTube, hey, people actually like this channel. Maybe don't hide it from everyone. That can really help push my videos out to a wider audience, not just to my subscribers. So if you enjoy these stories and want to support the channel, that's the best way to do it. Now grab a drink, get comfy, and enjoy the drama. You won't want to miss this one. I, 34 male, never thought I'd be sharing this on Reddit. But I really need some outside perspective on my family situation that spiraled completely out of control over the past month. I've been sitting here staring at my laptop for nearly an hour, trying to figure out where to even begin with this mess. I guess the beginning is as good a place as any. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio with my parents and younger brother Jake, now 32. From an early age, it was clear that Jake was the favorite. My parents never explicitly said it, but their actions spoke volumes. Jake was always described as sensitive and artistic, while I was the practical and resilient one. What this actually meant was that I had to constantly downplay my achievements and struggles to avoid upsetting Jake, who was prone to severe jealousy and emotional outbursts. Throughout elementary and middle school, I maintained high grades and participated in various extracurricular activities. I wasn't a genius or anything, just a hard-working kid who genuinely enjoyed learning. Jake, meanwhile, struggled academically and socially. Instead of encouraging both of us equally, or getting Jake the help he might have needed, my parents began a pattern that would define our family dynamic for decades. They protected Jake's ego at my expense. If I won an academic award, I was told not to mention it at home because it would make Jake feel bad. When I made the varsity basketball team as a freshman, while Jake didn't, my parents didn't attend a single game that season, claiming they were too busy. They were never too busy for Jake's community theater performances, though, even when he had minor roles. The real turning point came during our high school years. I had always been interested in computers and programming, spending hours teaching myself coding languages and building small projects. Jake, meanwhile, had decided he wanted to be a filmmaker. My parents took out a second mortgage to buy Jake professional camera equipment and editing software, and even funded a short film he wanted to make for a local competition. When I asked for a $500 computer component I needed for a programming competition, I was lectured about how money doesn't grow on trees and how I needed to be more considerate of the family's finances. Despite the lack of support, I managed to win that programming competition, which came with a $2,000 scholarship. I was ecstatic until I got home, and my parents barely acknowledged it, instead focusing on comforting Jake, who had been eliminated in the first round of his film competition that same weekend. That night, I overheard my mother telling my father that maybe they should ask me not to show off my technical skills around Jake, since it was making him insecure about his own abilities. By the time college applications rolled around, I had managed to secure a full scholarship to a prestigious tech university on the West Coast. My parents' response: they seemed more concerned about how Jake would feel about me going to a fancy school than they were proud of my achievement. They actually suggested I consider attending the local community college with Jake instead, to keep the family together and not create unnecessary competition. I declined, of course, and moved across the country for college. It was the first time I felt like I could breathe, like I didn't have to make myself smaller to accommodate someone else's fragility. I thrived in university, making friends who appreciated me, and professors who recognized my potential. I worked part-time at the university's IT department and took on freelance coding projects to support myself since my parents' financial help was minimal and came with strings attached. Don't tell Jake how much we're sending you. After graduation, I was fortunate enough to land a job at a promising tech startup in San Francisco. The timing was perfect. This was just before the big tech boom, and the company was developing an innovative e-commerce platform. I worked insane hours, often sleeping at the office, but I believed in what we were building. Meanwhile, Jake had dropped out of community college after 3 semesters and moved back home where my parents supported him while he found his path. The startup I joined hit it big, really big. We were acquired by a major tech company 4 years after I joined. And as one of the early employees with equity, I suddenly found myself with a 7-figure sum in my bank account. I was 28 years old and worth just over $2 million. I didn't go crazy with the money. I invested most of it, bought a modest but nice condo in Oakland, and continued working now at the acquiring company with a substantial salary and more stock options. Throughout this time, my relationship with my family had become increasingly distant. Our conversations were superficial, with my parents always steering the discussion toward Jake and his latest ventures. A podcast that got 12 subscribers, a channel that never took off, a screenplay he was working on. I learned to be vague about my own life, knowing that any success I mentioned would either be downplayed or met with comments like, "That's nice, but not everyone can be good with computers." Jake is pursuing his passion in a very competitive creative field. I never explicitly told them about my financial situation. It wasn't out of spite at first. It just never came up naturally in our surface-level conversations. Later, as I realized how dysfunctional our family dynamic was, I became more deliberate about keeping my private life separate from my family life. I wasn't flaunting wealth on social media or anything. I just lived my life quietly and comfortably, visiting home once a year for Christmas, where I dutifully listened to updates about Jake's latest unfinished projects, and my parents' thinly veiled suggestions that I could help out your brother if you're doing so well. Last year, Jake announced that he wanted to start his own independent film production company. My parents, now in their early 60s and preparing for retirement, emptied out a significant portion of their savings and even took out another loan against their house to provide Jake with startup capital. They called me soon after to see if I would contribute to supporting your brother's dreams, suggesting that $15,000 would be a good starting point for my contribution. I politely declined, saying I didn't have that kind of money available for investment purposes at the moment. That was a complete lie. Of course, I had the money, but I knew from experience that any financial support given to Jake was as good as setting cash on fire. I had watched my parents bail him out time and time again, throwing money at every new passion project he came up with, only for it to fizzle out a few months later. I wasn't about to participate in another one of his doomed endeavors. My response did not go over well. My mother accused me of being jealous of Jake's creative genius, while my father said I'd always been coldly practical and incapable of understanding artistic vision. I held my ground, wished Jake luck with his venture, and ended the call. That was the last conversation I had with them for months. 6 months later, Jake's production company had produced nothing except an expensive logo and a barely functional website. My parents' investment had mostly vanished, and Jake was already talking about how real artists struggle in the beginning and how he just needed one big break to make it all work. Meanwhile, I had undergone a minor surgery and was feeling particularly vulnerable. I reached out to my parents for emotional support, hoping for some words of comfort or just a check-in. Instead, they told me they were too busy helping Jake deal with the stress of entrepreneurship. That was the final straw for me. I decided to take a break from contacting them and focused on my own healing and well-being. For 3 months, there was complete radio silence. No calls, no texts, nothing. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister, who I've always liked but rarely speak to since she lives abroad. She told me something disturbing. My parents had been talking to the rest of the family about me, saying they were worried about my strange behavior, aka not contacting them and implying that I was abandoning them while they struggled financially. Instead of being relieved that I was doing well, my parents were furious. My aunt told me they felt betrayed and were convinced I had been living in luxury while allowing my family to struggle financially. The next day, I received a long guilt-tripping email from my father. It was full of accusations, saying that while they had been reorganizing their house to support Jake, I had been hoarding millions and watching them sink into debt. He demanded an explanation for why I had abandoned the family and turned my back on my brother who needed my support. What followed was an avalanche of messages from extended family members. Apparently, my parents had spread a twisted version of events, making it sound like I was a greedy, selfish monster who had intentionally hidden my wealth while my aging parents worked themselves to the bone to support my struggling brother. Even Jake got in on it, sending me a long-winded text about how I'd always been jealous of him and how I was punishing him for having the courage to follow his dreams by withholding financial support. And then came the most absurd part. My parents were now claiming that I owe them and Jake a significant portion of my money because family takes care of family. And if we had known you were rich, we wouldn't have had to struggle all these years. They even went as far as having a lawyer contact me regarding their so-called parental investment in my education, which, to be clear, was minimal compared to what they spent on Jake. They were now claiming that I had a moral obligation to repay them now that I was successful. I was completely stunned by this turn of events. I had never lied about my situation. I just didn't volunteer information to people who had spent years dismissing my achievements and treating me like an emotional support system for Jake. I had even sent money occasionally when they mentioned specific financial hardships, but I had been careful not to enable their pattern of throwing money at Jake's never-ending list of failed ventures. Now, I was suddenly being framed as the villain in their narrative, as if I had been sitting back and watching my family suffer while counting my millions. The reality: I worked incredibly hard for everything I have, received almost no support from my family throughout my life, and simply chose to keep my financial situation private because I knew exactly how they would react. And now here we were. So am I an a-hole for not telling my family about my financial success? Was I wrong to maintain privacy about my wealth? Should I be responsible for financially supporting my parents and brother despite our history? I feel completely lost and could use some outside perspective on this situation. Not the a-hole. OP didn't hide anything. OP protected his peace. OP wasn't obligated to give his family a financial update every time your life changed. They ignored OP's achievements for decades, minimized OP's needs, and only cared once they realized OP was successful. That's not support. That's opportunism. OP owes them nothing. And now let's hear community's opinion. Your parents aren't looking for reconciliation. They're looking for a wallet. Everything they've done points to the same pattern. They pour unlimited resources into Jake, dismiss your accomplishments, then suddenly demand family loyalty the moment they discover you're financially comfortable. This isn't about love or fairness. It's about trying to turn you into the new funding source now that they've drained themselves supporting Jake's endless unfinished projects. Classic golden child versus scapegoat dynamic. Jake gets unconditional praise, emotional cushioning, and financial backing for every failed venture. You get silence, guilt trips, and pressure to dim your own success. Then they rewrite history to make themselves look like selfless parents who sacrificed for both sons. That alone proves why keeping your wealth private was the smartest thing you could have done. Setting boundaries doesn't make you the villain. You worked hard for everything you have. They made their choices, and now they're facing the consequences of years of favoritism and financial irresponsibility. You're not responsible for rescuing them, especially when they only treat you like a solution, not a son. Protect your peace and stay firm. You're absolutely not the a-hole. Update 1. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone for the overwhelming support, advice, and validation. When I posted my story, I didn't expect it to get so much attention, let alone resonate with so many people. Reading through the comments and messages has really helped me feel less alone and less like I'm the crazy one in this whole situation. After taking some time to process everything, I decided that the best course of action was to approach this rationally and methodically rather than react emotionally. This wasn't just about dealing with my parents and Jake. It was about setting firm boundaries for my own peace of mind moving forward. The first thing I did was consult a lawyer, not because I was genuinely worried about their ridiculous legal threats, but because I wanted professional confirmation that I wasn't missing anything and that my rights were fully protected. My lawyer immediately reassured me that my parents' so-called claim over my financial success was completely baseless. They have no legal grounds to demand money from me, and any attempt to take me to court over this would be a waste of time and money on their part. But my lawyer also suggested that instead of ignoring the situation, I should formally respond to them to make my stance crystal clear. This would not only shut down any further legal threats, but also serve as documentation in case they tried to escalate things in the future. So, I wrote an email to my parents with my lawyer CC to clarify several important points. I never lied about my financial situation. I simply maintained my privacy, which is my right. Just because I didn't announce my net worth doesn't mean I was being deceptive. Every dollar I have was earned through my own hard work, education, and investment decisions. I did not receive any significant financial support from them, certainly nowhere near what they gave Jake over the years. I have no legal or moral obligation to financially support them or Jake. They made the conscious decision to pour their resources into Jake's dreams while I built my own life independently. They don't get to demand money from me now just because my path led to success while Jake didn't. Their recent actions spreading false narratives to extended family, attempting to guilt trip me, and trying to use legal threats to manipulate me have severely damaged our relationship. While I don't harbor hatred toward them, they have made it clear that they see me as a financial resource rather than a valued family member. I also took the time to lay out a factual timeline of our family history, including the years of favoritism toward Jake and the ways in which my accomplishments were consistently minimized. I wanted it to be clear that this was not just about money. It was about a long-standing pattern of behavior that had led us to this point. I ended the email by making it clear that while I wished them well, I would not tolerate being treated this way, and any further attempts to harass or manipulate me would only result in me cutting contact completely. Not long after, my aunt, my mom's sister, reached out to me again. She has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this, which I truly appreciate. She confirmed what I had already suspected. My parents had been telling extended family a wildly exaggerated version of events. According to them, they made enormous sacrifices to put me through college, which is laughably untrue, considering I was on a full scholarship and worked part-time jobs throughout, and that I had been deliberately hiding my success from them out of childhood jealousy toward Jake. But here is where it gets even more interesting. My aunt also revealed that this is not the first time my parents have pulled something like this. Apparently, years ago, they had a major falling out with my dad's brother over a very similar issue. My uncle had refused to loan them money for one of Jake's earlier failed ventures, and they completely cut him off, bad-mouthing him to the rest of the family. I had always been told that my uncle was the one who abandoned the family over a trivial disagreement. Now, I'm realizing that the story I was fed growing up might have been a complete fabrication. As for Jake, he's been texting me non-stop since all of this went down. His messages are a mix of angry rants and guilt-tripping attempts. One minute he's calling me selfish, greedy, and heartless, and the next he's trying to reminisce about our close childhood bond, which, for the record, never actually existed, and how he always looked up to his big brother. The sheer emotional manipulation is exhausting, and if anything, it only reassures me that I'm making the right decision by putting distance between us. For now, I've decided to block both my parents and Jake on all platforms, while I take some time to focus on myself. My lawyer advised me to keep records of all their messages and emails in case they escalate things further, but she believes that my formal response will likely put an end to any serious legal threats. Some people suggested family therapy, and while I appreciate the thought, I don't think we're anywhere close to that being a realistic option. Therapy only works if all parties involved are willing to acknowledge their role in the problem and make an effort to change. Right now, my parents and Jake still see themselves as victims, and me as their golden ticket. Until that changes, there's no point in even considering reconciliation. At the end of the day, I'm realizing that family isn't just about blood. It's about mutual respect, support, and care. I have plenty of wonderful people in my life who uplift and encourage me, and I'd rather invest my energy in those relationships than continue trying to force something with people who have made it clear they only value me for what I can provide them. I'll update again if anything major happens, but for now, I'm prioritizing my mental health, my career, and the people who actually appreciate and respect me. And again, to everyone who took the time to comment and share their own experiences, thank you. You've helped me more than you know. Update 2. Well, things have certainly taken an unexpected turn. 2 days ago, I received a formal letter from my parents' lawyer dropping all previous claims and instead proposing a family reconciliation agreement. This document essentially asked me to commit to paying off my parents' mortgage, about $230,000, covering Jake's business debts, approximately $180,000, and establishing a family support fund with a minimum of $500,000 that would be jointly managed by all of us. In exchange, they would welcome me back into the family fold and forgive my secretive behavior. The letter framed this as a generous compromise that would avoid costly legal battles and irreparable damage to family relationships. My lawyer nearly laughed when she read it, confirming that there was absolutely no legal basis for any of their demands, and that the thinly veiled threats were just that, empty threats. I didn't respond to the proposal directly. Instead, I had my lawyer send a brief, professionally worded letter, declining any financial arrangement and reiterating that further attempts at financial coercion would result in complete cessation of contact. What I didn't expect was what happened next. Yesterday morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jake calling from a friend's phone since I had blocked his number. He sounded different, subdued, and surprisingly somewhat sober in his thinking. He asked if we could meet in person to talk, just the two of us, no parents involved. After some consideration, I agreed to a video call instead since we live on opposite coasts. I expected another attempt at manipulation, but what I got was something entirely different. Jake admitted that he'd always known about the favoritism in our family and had taken advantage of it throughout our lives. He confessed that he had never really been passionate about filmmaking or any of his other ventures. He had simply found that expressing interest in creative pursuits was an easy way to get our parents' attention, admiration, and financial support. The most shocking revelation came when he told me that he had actually been the one to suggest hiring the Pie to investigate me. According to Jake, our parents had been talking about cutting him off financially after his latest business failure, and he needed to divert their attention away from his repeated mistakes. He thought that if they discovered I was doing well financially, they would focus their frustration on me instead of holding him accountable. What he didn't anticipate was how extreme their reaction would be, or how far they would go with their demands and threats. He said that watching our parents transform their narrative from Jake is special and needs support to we sacrificed everything for both our sons, and now the successful one needs to pay us back, made him realize just how conditional their love had always been. Jake then did something I never expected. He apologized. Not just a superficial sorry if you felt hurt kind of apology, but a specific acknowledgement of how he had contributed to my exclusion from the family, and how he had selfishly enjoyed being the favorite at my expense. He admitted that he had always been jealous of my actual abilities and determination, in contrast to his own pattern of starting things and never following through. I'm still processing this conversation and what it means. On one hand, I appreciate Jake's apology. On the other hand, this revelation about his role in the Pie situation makes the whole thing even more disturbing. He basically admitted to intentionally setting me up as a scapegoat to avoid facing the consequences for his own failures. As for my parents, they've been leaving voicemails and sending emails demanding to know why I'm suddenly willing to talk to Jake, but not to them. They seem to be under the impression that Jake and I are conspiring against them now, which couldn't be further from the truth. One particularly desperate message from my mother included the line, "After everything we've sacrificed for you boys, this is how you repay us." I'm planning to maintain my distance from my parents for the foreseeable future. As for Jake, I'm cautiously open to occasional communication, but I've made it clear that I won't be providing financial support for him or his ventures. He claims to understand and respect this boundary, but only time will tell if that's true. I've also decided to reach out to other estranged family members, including my uncle, to hear their side of various family conflicts. I have a feeling I've been fed a lot of distorted narratives over the years, and it's time I learned the truth. I'll update again when there are further developments. Thank you all again for your support and perspective during this bizarre family drama. Update 3. I wish I could say things have calmed down, but the situation has actually become even more dramatic. After my conversation with Jake, I decided to reach out to my uncle, my father's brother, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. I wasn't sure what to expect, but he was surprisingly open to talking. Our conversation was nothing short of eye-opening. He was a bit shocked to hear from me after so long, but once I explained what had been going on, he sighed and said, "I was wondering when you'd start putting the pieces together." According to him, My parents have a long history of financially manipulating people, and their treatment of me is just the latest version of an old pattern. He told me that before they cut him off, my parents had borrowed money from multiple family members under the pretense of various emergencies or temporary situations. The promises to pay it back almost never fulfilled. They had done this so many times that eventually most of the family wised up and started saying no. The final straw for my uncle wasn't just refusing to fund one of Jake's projects. It was calling them out on their long-standing habit of treating family like an ATM while misrepresenting their own finances. But the most shocking thing he told me was about my maternal grandparents. According to my parents, they had received very little from them when they passed, which they used as part of their narrative about struggling financially while raising us. Turns out that was a complete lie. My parents actually received close to $400,000 in inheritance 20 years ago, which was meant to be split between my mother and her sister, my supportive aunt. But instead of saving or investing it, my parents quickly burned through it on a mix of lifestyle upgrades, paying off old debts, and funding Jake's early artistic endeavors. This included an expensive semester at a prestigious film workshop in New York, something I never even knew about. While I was still processing this information, something even more unexpected happened. My father showed up at my condo. I have no idea how he flew across the country without warning me. But when I saw him standing outside my building through the security camera, I was completely stunned. I didn't let him up to my unit, but after some consideration, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop nearby. From the moment I sat down, the tension was thick. My father looked exhausted and stressed, and he wasted no time launching into a speech about family loyalty and how my mother was sick with worry over the family being torn apart. He tried to frame his visit as a desperate attempt to bring us back together, but I wasn't buying it. So I asked him point blank, why was he really here? The facade cracked almost immediately. He admitted they were facing foreclosure on their house because of the loans they had taken out for Jake's failed production company. He even pulled out bank statements showing their dire financial situation and a stack of medical bills, claiming my mother needed treatments they couldn't afford. At first, I just listened. Then I started asking questions. I asked him about the inheritance. I asked about the money they had borrowed from family members. I asked why they had always painted themselves as struggling, when in reality they had received a substantial financial cushion. The look on his face was priceless. He was clearly shocked that I knew, but he recovered quickly and spun the story. He insisted that the money had been invested in both their sons' futures and that any loans from family were all just misunderstandings. When I pressed him for specifics about my mother's supposed medical condition, he suddenly became vague and evasive, which set off even more alarm bells. At that point, I knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about reconciliation or family unity. This was about money, plain and simple. I ended the conversation by telling him that I saw through their manipulation and that I wouldn't be providing financial support under these conditions. I suggested they speak to a financial advisor, consider downsizing their house, and adjust their lifestyle to match their actual income. I also made it clear that if they wanted any future contact, they needed to go through my lawyer. Until they were ready to have an honest, non-transactional relationship, I wanted nothing to do with them. As he got up to leave, he made one last attempt at guilt, tripping me. I hope you're happy living in luxury while your mother and I end up on the street. I guess all those years of raising you meant nothing. I didn't take the bait. I just told him I had made my decision and walked away. When I got home, I saw several missed calls from my mother. Then I got a text from Jake. Just a heads up. Mom and Dad are on the warpath. They're talking about contacting your employer or showing up at your workplace to expose you as a person who abandons family in need. Be careful. That was the final straw. I immediately contacted my company's security team and gave them a heads up about the situation. I also took additional security measures at my home in case my parents decided to escalate things even further. At this point, I've also decided to start seeing a therapist. As much as I know I'm making the right decisions, I can feel the weight of years of conditioning trying to pull me into guilt. I need to make sure I stay firm in my boundaries and don't let their emotional manipulation wear me down. The only silver lining in all of this is that reconnecting with my uncle and other arranged family members has been eye-opening. Apparently, I'm not the only one who has been treated this way. We've even started a group chat to support each other and share stories, which has been incredibly validating. It's sad to realize how deep this pattern goes, but it's also reassuring to know that I'm not crazy for recognizing it. As for Jake, our communication remains cautious, but civil. He says he's looking for legitimate work now and is done with expecting our parents to fund his dreams. Whether this is genuine growth or just his way of adapting to the loss of his usual safety net remains to be seen. Right now, my priority is protecting my own well-being and surrounding myself with people who can engage honestly and without ulterior motives. My parents have shown me exactly who they are, and I refuse to be a part of their toxic cycle anymore. I don't know what the future holds for my family relationships, but one thing is certain: I'm done being their financial safety net. Thank you all again for your support and advice throughout this whole mess. Your insights have helped me stay grounded, and I truly appreciate it.